All right, welcome into the latest edition of the second half draft show. I am your host, Juice. It has been a minute. It's been effectively a month since we've done a live stream, and well past due. Right, we've crowned a Super Bowl champion in the Seattle Seahawks. Shout out to Mr. C. Prasky and his Hawks. We've gone through the Senior Bowl process. Of course, the combine is underway. We're actually halfway through the combine. That's really where we're going to focus on things tonight. May get a couple other nuggets of news to kind of trickle in, but certainly the emphasis right now is in Indianapolis at the combine. And I want to talk about some of the standout performances and then some additional individuals that may have some concerns, or at least some concerns in the eyes of evaluators at large. So let's jump into it. I'm actually going to leverage NFL.com's combine tracker to kind of guide us through this process. Let's see here. Let's bring this in. There we are. And I want to start at the edge position. All right. And of course, when you think about the edge position in what is a fairly deep class, actually a very deep class, I wouldn't, I'm not going to hedge. This is a very deep class in terms of edge players. But obviously, the combine is designed to get a sense of the player's athleticism, at least in terms of what happens on the field. Obviously, the interviews tend to be paramount, but what happens on the field in terms of these testing numbers matters a great deal to the organizations, the NFL organizations, as well as they have their various thresholds for their various teams and schemes and so on and so forth. So, um, Arvell Reese clearly wowed folks in terms of his performance. Runs a 4.46. That is blazing. Now, mind you, he's played a ton of off-ball linebacker, but even by off-ball linebacker standards, 4.46 is incredible. And that's 6'4", 241, 32-inch arms. That 1.58 second 10-yard split is exactly where you want to be as he transitions to playing edge, right? The best pass rushers, the top pass rushers tend to have maybe not as fast a 40-yard time, but certainly that initial burst, that 10-yard split comes into play quite a bit. And you want to be in that 1.59 range, and clearly he clears that. So really impressive showing from him. We'll get to his teammates, the Styles brothers for sure. But again, when you talk about that transition and how Reese will be leveraged at the next level, it's interesting. I think it's interesting. Some folks say he's the closest thing to Micah Parsons since Micah Parsons, which was an off-ball linebacker that clearly had perhaps an underappreciated ability to actually affect the quarterback. And as things progress, as his NFL career progressed, he started playing edge full time. Now, I think Reese I'm of two minds. I'm of two minds. I think Parsons is such a good pass rusher that the transition to full time made a lot of sense, especially considering the teams that he plays for, right? Reese, on the other hand, I'm not convinced just yet. That isn't to say that he won't be a quality edge, very good edge at the NFL level. I just wonder if it's not the best usage of him. Instead, playing off-ball linebacker, perhaps, the majority of the time, give me 40 plays or so off ball, early down off ball, because he's such a terrific run defender. And then in obvious passing situations, 20 or so snaps as an edge rusher. The counterpoint, and I'm going to make the counterpoint against that, is that I don't think he's particularly good in terms of pass coverage, right? Yeah, if you want him to drop into a hook zone of some sort, or get out there into the flat, I think that's fine. Which obviously supports him moving to the edge, but you want Reese moving forward. You want him moving forward, whether he's playing off ball or edge. You want him attacking. You want him going downhill. Excellent movement skills. Of course, he just did the 40-yard dash. No other drills or measurements here. I assume he'll take care of the rest at his pro day. He probably doesn't need to do anything else, right? After this particular showing, this kind of cements the fact that folks already believed him to be a upper echelon athlete. Clearly is. Um, he probably could rest on his laurels, but I wonder if he goes out and continues to test and try to help continue to kind of clear up that picture at the top of the draft. You know, entering the combine, the conversation was around Reese and David Bailey of Texas Tech, and of course Ruben Bain from Miami in terms of, you know, who's going to be the first edge off the board in this class. And uh Reese has certainly made his case in terms of his performance at the combine. All right. So with that said, let's go to the next player, next edge player that I thought impressed. Head back for a second here. Quite a few, as I mentioned, really did. The aforementioned David Bailey certainly helped himself. Now, in the case of Bailey, his 40 time, his 10-yard split, perhaps not upper echelon, but definitely plays. The vertical jump number and the broad jump number shows a certain level of explosiveness. The real question mark and where people knock David Bailey is the change of direction. He's quite linear in his approach. Now, it doesn't seem to impact his ability to get to the quarterback, but there are some concerns in terms of him projecting to the next level, right? And do you perhaps prioritize Reese's athleticism over David Bailey's proven ability to get to the quarterback on a consistent basis? Now, mind you, Reese hasn't played edge on in a full-time capacity. And you could make the argument that David Bailey hasn't until this past season, right? He was always kind of used sparingly, situational football. I think there were concerns about him in terms of his run defense. I think he certainly improved there, and he acknowledged that at the combine in Indy that, you know, it's an area where he can continue to develop. But the tape clearly shows the ability to get to the quarterback, right? Led the FBS in sacks. Like he does that. That's not that's not a problem for David Bailey. So I just wonder how much stock is going to be put into the fact that, you know, he is a little linear. He's not the best in terms of change of direction. I certainly am not going to take him off my board, nor do I expect anybody to. But how much do you think, even with this impressive showing as far as explosiveness, right, linear explosiveness, do you move David Bailey down? Is he clearly behind Arvell Reese? I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't. Um, no, nor would he's you know, below Ruben Bain. And we're going to talk about Bain and the concerns around him. Of course, he didn't do any testing other than the measurements. And of course, his arm length is being widely discussed. And I'll give my thoughts on that momentarily. But if the Jets perhaps decided to go to David Bailey, don't go with David Bailey second overall. They traded away Jermaine Johnson to the Tennessee Titans, who previously played for Robert Saleh, the new head coach there. Now you have a scenario where Tavondre Sweat, the big interior defensive lineman, still a young player, good player, goes over to the Jets. It appears that the Jets are zeroing in on the edge rusher. So who's it going to be? Like I said, based on his performance, even with some of the concerns in terms of the change of direction, I wouldn't rule David Bailey out second overall. And we've maintained here, whether it be Couch Potato General Manager or you know our streaming platform in terms of the second half draft show, we've talked about David Bailey glowingly since last summer. It's not a Johnny come lately, you know, after this Texas Tech season. I think we saw what we expected given a full complement of snaps to work with. So it's hard for me not to look away from the film and the productivity, but I understand some of the hesitation associated with the run defense at times, and perhaps some challenges with respect to change of direction. I don't think it's something that he can't work on, though. So I just want to kind of keep that at the forefront of my mind. And clearly, a bigger player than Arvell Reese. All right. Okay. The next name you see here also really turned some heads. And Malachi Lawrence has had a hive for a lot of draft season, right? Over the last couple of months. It's not a player that I was familiar with per se prior to draft season kind of getting underway, but I've seen his name come up a lot in conversations around the edge rushers, right? And I think he had about 7.5 sacks for UCF. played well. You know, as I get more and more exposed to his film, there's certainly a lot to like about him. But then he goes to the combine, and this is where he really opened up eyes, I think, or rather, substantiated perhaps what people were seeing on film. Right? You know, you run the second fastest 40 or the third fastest 40 among edge rushers at 253 pounds, 4.52. That is exactly where you want to be in terms of your 10-yard split. That's the Brian Burns, you know, that's the upper echelon double digit sack 10-yard split, time. That's kind of where that average falls. The vertical jump of 40 inches is terrific. That just again goes to his explosiveness as well as the 10 broad jump. So, marrying up the performance on the field with really impressive athletic testing goes a long way. Almost 34-inch arms. NFL teams are going to love that. NFL teams are going to love that. And Malachi Lawrence, as far as his draft stock, it's soaring. It's soaring. I watched some of the broadcasts associated with the combine, and I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah just saying, or rather maybe Charles Davis was saying, yeah, there's a lot of buzz around Malachi Lawrence. A lot of buzz. I think he's probably going to go ahead of a couple of edges I thought were going to be early day two picks, considering, again, so a strong showing there at UCF as well as some really impressive athletic testing. Okay. Another name I thought did himself some favors here over the course of the combine, day one, was Denny Dennis Sutton. 6'6", 256, 33-inch arms, ran a 4.63. That's a quality split, 10-yard split at 1.63, almost 40 inches on the vertical, explosive broad jump, and a pretty impressive cone drill as well. I think he tested a lot better than I expected. So this is a situation where I'm gonna have to go back to the film. I'm gonna have to go back to the film and see if this athleticism, this profile shows up. I thought, on my first go round with respect to Dennis Sutton, I thought, okay, he might be able to net you 6.5, maybe 7 sacks. When he kind of reaches his peak, there may be maybe one or so double digit sack season, but I think he's going to play really good run defense and be a solid starter in this season. Right? Excuse me, in the league, he's going to be a solid starter in the league, and just not expecting big time pressure rate or sack totals. Right? This athletic testing suggests a bit more explosiveness, so I'm going to revisit it, see if maybe there's something that he could tweak potentially to finish on a more consistent basis. But I thought he certainly helped himself throughout the combine as well. Day one of the combine, one of the more well-rounded athletic testing performances among the edges that probably isn't getting a whole lot of love right now, considering some of the other performances we've seen over the last 2 days at the combine. Right. And keep it going here among the edges. I thought Jashawn Barman probably helped himself a little bit as well. Um, that's a really impressive, that's a quality 10-yard split, 1.61 10-yard split. The jumps were solid, not overwhelming. They were solid, but I think just kind of demonstrating that, hey, no, there's a little underlying athleticism to all that physicality that I bring. And this is a player that, not unlike Reese, has played a lot of off-ball linebacker throughout his collegiate career, and it's appearing to kind of transition to the edge. So I think Barham has probably put folks on notice. Not an overwhelming athletic performance here at the combine, but I think he definitely helped himself. Okay. Just taking a look at another few that I thought came away impressive. That may be it among the guys that I thought maybe turned some heads. I want to just take a quick look at Trey Moore's number. I don't recall him standing out necessarily. Yeah, not terrible numbers from Trey Moore, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a winner. I do want to acknowledge a couple perhaps concerns among the edge rushers as it relates to some of their athletic testing. So, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Ruben Bain. It's been well documented in terms of having historically short arms. Not only him but Cassius Howell, and these are two players that we identified on our platform very early in the process. Um, Bain was no secret, but certainly Cassius Howell wasn't quite widely as known. That we were very high on, and I remain high on these players. Right, I think the way they win, their length isn't a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I think Hal will probably slide a bit more than I had anticipated because I had always been higher on Hal. I had him as the fourth edge. I think Mesidor certainly will eclipse him under those circumstances. But Hal is still very much a first round pick in my mind, and I think I think he'll have his success because of his movement ability, because of his explosiveness. You can see with the 4.59 40-yard dash, 1.58 10-yard split, that's phenomenal, but not necessarily the most explosive athlete. But the speed, the quickness, the twitch is certainly there, and that ultimately is how he wins. So I think you get him in the appropriate system. Definitely not a hand in the ground 4-3 edge. You want to stand him up. You want him in a motorcycle stance, getting after it, really putting those offensive tackles in a bind. Okay, and then of course, as I mentioned, buried the lead a little bit. Ruben Bain, right? His arms measure in under 31 inches. That was the expectation. Now it's all been legitimized, formalized, legitimized, and I think absolutely certain organizations are going to be like, let's go ahead and especially at the top of the draft, they may decide ultimately, hey, listen, we're going to bet on the projection associated with Reese. We've seen enough of him as a pass rusher to really put our eggs in that basket, perhaps play him there full time. Again, I maintain I'd like him to moonlight as a pass rusher. I like him to green dog, come on that delayed blitz because of the way he closes, right? Such a great run defender off ball. Perhaps he can hold up, considering how he kind of uncoils and his power, he can hold up at the edge on a full-time basis. But again, the thought process is, the NFL draft is a projection one way or the other, but certainly with him, because he hasn't played edge full time, we'll commit to this very high ceiling, 1 year of elite production, in general, and move forward with Arvell Reese. Or perhaps, you know what, we're going to go with David Bailey. It's clear that it can affect the passer on a consistent basis. He demonstrated that. What he doesn't lack, or rather, what he does lack in terms of, perhaps some of that lateral movement ability, we'll live with that. He checks the boxes in terms of, again, explosiveness and arm length, those types of things, those measurables that, again, certain scouts, front offices, are going to covet. Whereas Ruben Bain isn't as twitchy an athlete as Reese or Bailey. Certainly doesn't have that linear speed that these guys possess. Um, he's a powerhouse, though. He's a stronger player. He's a better football player overall. Where I think Bailey might be a slightly better pass rusher. Reese certainly a better athlete. I think Ruben Bain is the superior football player. The short arms be damned. I think just the way he wins, the way he's transformed his body, the fact that he can effectively play anywhere on the defensive line aside from nose, the one tech, right? He's played 2I all the way out to the wide nine, right? And entering the 2025 season, I was concerned. I was concerned because in 24 he dealt with some injuries, still very effective, still dominant at times, but he dealt with some injuries. I thought he was carrying quite a bit of weight. I think they needed him to, because they had some concerns, they had some personnel issues in terms of interior defensive line. He and Mesidor get in the lab. Jason Taylor says, hey, you guys need to transfer your bodies if you want to be edges at the next level. Those guys went to work. They look phenomenal. I was blown away by that opener, right? Ruben Bain, again, since his freshman year, true freshman, he's been a stud, powerhouse, right? Throwing offensive tackles despite the short arms out of the club. A myriad of ways to get to the quarterback, right? Just the bevy of pass rush moves, and And like I said, in the 2025 season, he started to really bend the edge. He really started to turn that corner, which gave me all the confidence to say, "Oh no, he can live at the edge." Maybe previously I was thinking perhaps early downs he plays edge, then you reduce him down in obvious passing situations. I think that may still be the path for him, considering the arm length concerns. But aside from that, he's phenomenal. And like I said, I think he's the better football player among the three. I think because that arm length concern is a definitive outlier. What was it? That there hasn't been a a defender or an edge player with that arm length to ever record double digit sacks or something along those lines, at least since sacks have been tracked. I get it. I get it. It's a significant data point. I just can't unsee what I've watched over the last 3 seasons. I can't unsee it. Right. So for my money, I might put myself in the crosshairs if I were a GM. I would still take Ruben Bain with the Jets. Now, again, I understand. I'm not going to lose my mind if they decide to go in a different directions. Let's say the Cardinals, the Titans, they decide to go with a defender or pass rusher. It wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me, and I wouldn't be flabbergasted. But anything beyond the Commanders to me is egregious in terms of Ruben Bain. Again, I fully acknowledging the fact that a player at his position with that arm length is an outlier. I cannot unsee the last 3 years of his film. Do me a favor, check out my breakdown on Ruben Bain. Did it in season. I'll leave a link for that particular video. You definitely want to check that out. You'll get a good feel for how he wins and how he's evolved over the last several seasons. So as you talk about NFL Combine, day one, day two, winners here for the 2026 NFL Draft. I guess you could consider Bain a loser. Maybe he's no longer in the running to be a top two pick. But anything outside of the top 7 to 10, I think is just egregious. I think it's egregious. And again, I wouldn't bat an eyelash if they took him number two. So one more player at the edge that I wanted to kind of mention, and perhaps just a little disappointed. Not because I think I'm gonna change my thought process with respect to how I rank him in this particular draft. But R. Mason Thomas, you could see that he's not the biggest edge rusher, right? 241. You could see that on film. Just a shade under 32 arm length. So I think he's okay from that regard. I thought I saw a bit more explosiveness on film. So I'm not going to discredit that. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I thought the 1.63 split is decent at his size. I think that's decent, and I think he remains towards the top half of the second round. But I was expecting better. I was expecting better. Again, probably not going to result in any change for me, but you never know with some of these NFL organizations as to whether or not it actually negatively impacts his draft stock. So there you have it. Those are the edges, your winners predominantly, and then a couple of question marks, right? A couple of question marks coming out of this edge group, but top to bottom, really good group. And I must say, I'm going to reiterate, I think Malachi Lawrence probably helped himself the most out of anyone, right? Again, he had a bit of a hive over the last few months, right? There's some good counting numbers. Pass rush win rate is quality, and then you marry that up with a really impressive performance in terms of the athletic testing. He is going to fly up boards. I think he's going to be a top 40 pick for sure. Maybe not for sure, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking top 40 pick at this point. All right, let's talk about the interior defensive lineman. Right, there was some impressive performances there. Right at the top in terms of the 40, you see Zane Durant, little undersized, but not nothing egregious. Just like Dennis Sutton, fairly impressive athletic testing. I didn't necessarily always see this on film. I wonder if just from the perspective of what they're being asked to do, you don't necessarily get a good feel for it. Now, both players were in Mobile. I thought they were okay. I don't think they did anything were world beaters or anything, but I thought they had a solid process through the Senior Bowl. But I think definitely during the combine, they've helped themselves. They've helped themselves. I definitely have to revisit the tape for Sutton in particular. So um, Durant had the best 40, but when you talk about winners, not just for the combine, not just for the combine, but I think throughout this draft process thus far, one of the biggest winners for me has got to be Grayson Halton. I talked about him at length, talked about Grayson Halton at length in my recap of the Senior Bowl performances, and I just thought that there are just too few people talking about him, right? He doesn't have elite length, not the biggest guy. He's clearly a three tech, but I thought his performance at the combine certainly is going to open up more eyes. But if you go back, you take a look at my video, you take a look at those one-on-ones and the team portion of the Senior Bowl. I thought he outplayed Caleb Banks, who clearly had a strong Senior Bowl performance. I thought he outplayed Lee Hunter out of Texas Tech, who had a wonderful Senior Bowl performance. I thought he was the best interior defensive lineman there all week. Couldn't be blocked. Couldn't be blocked. So I think finally, especially now that he's kind of punctuated his pre-draft process with a good showing here at the NFL Combine, definitely a winner from the Combine day one. Um, I think he's going to move into the bottom half of the second round. I thought I'm sure NFL teams were already aware because you don't have a lot of these guys in this particular class. You have some of those. You have a few tweeners here and there, but legitimate three techs, there just aren't very many of them in this particular class. And Halton might be the best one when it's all said and done. I think he probably is the best legitimate three tech. You could play Bane at three tech and he'd be the best. But in terms of where you slot them in, interior defensive lineman, I think Grayson Halton, again, throughout this entire pre-draft process, has been a big winner. What's going on, Mr. C? Good to see you, man. Congratulations on that Super Bowl win, man. Go Hawks. All right. Who else we got here in the interior defensive line? Demonte Capehart, right? Seemingly a forgotten guy. Seemingly a forgotten guy, right? Yeah, I think 2 years ago, he had some really wow type plays, folded up some centers. And, I think early in the 2024 process as it relates to mock drafts and stuff, he was kind of an in vogue first round pick. And then things cooled throughout the season, goes back to school. Okay, perhaps this is the year he punctuates things. You just didn't hear from him, right? And I think that's more of a byproduct of Clemson and the fact that they really did not play him a lot of snaps. At one point, at least prior to last year, he had played maybe like 15 snaps a game. It was again, I don't expect a guy that's playing the one, the zero, the one to play, 50 snaps, but 15 seemed really underwhelming. But this is a big man with a lot of power, and he's pretty damn athletic, right? That 4.85 40 is impressive at 313, and so is that 10-yard split, all things considered. So I think he helped himself. He's back into I think the minds of evaluators. I really do feel like Demonte Capehart just kind of fell by the wayside. Again, it could be some of his own play or lack thereof, and then of course Clemson's general struggles. But I think with this performance, it helped him. He's considered a winner because he's now back in the frame of people's minds as it relates to okay, what are we going to do as far as interior defensive line in the draft? Eh, Caleb Banks. Caleb Banks certainly helped himself. When you look at Caleb Banks, he's just impressive. He's just an impressive specimen, right? Clearly, he dealt with an injury this year, missed most of the season. It doesn't help. That doesn't help because you're not at the forefront of people's mind. But I go back a couple of seasons actually, and when Drew and Headley were talking about, Tyreek Sapp and who was the other guy? There was one other, I think it was an interior defensive lineman. His name's escaping me. Um, But they were talking about a couple other prospects, including Tyreek Sapp, and I just kept on. I'm like, Caleb Banks is the guy. Like, what are we talking about? Caleb Banks. I think at that point, a couple years ago, he wasn't draft eligible. At least that in my mind, that's the thought. Perhaps he was like maybe a redshirt sophomore. But Caleb Banks to me is the guy that flashed the most, right? 6'6", 330 pounds, 35-inch arms, right? He's giving you problems, but I think he's lacking a little consistency, but all of the physical tools there and the pass rush moves, the hand usage, the rip, the swim, it's there. It's there, right? So, you get to see that big locomotive kind of moving here with this just over 5-second 40-yard dash and a 1.76 split. That's not bad. That's not bad, right? He's a handful. He's a handful. And during the Senior Bowl, again, I'm talking about the entire NFL process. Dominic Orange was not at the combine, I don't think. I don't think Big Six was at the combine, Mr. C. Let me double check on that, but I don't recall seeing him. He may not have just tested. He may have been there, but just didn't test. Uh, Caleb Banks, as I mentioned, he missed the lion's share of the season. I think he played in parts of 3 or 4 games the entire season at the beginning of the season. So the first time we see Caleb Banks playing football is in Mobile, right at the Senior Bowl, and day one, offensive linemen were handling him. They were taking advantage of him. Guys have given up, a cool 30 pounds were manhandling him, right? And then you could tell though that he was just knocking off some rust, that he was kind of feeling it out, trying to kind of get his legs under him. And then by I think halfway through the second set of one-on-ones on day two, he started to figure things out. He started to kind of remember how talented he is, how much better he is than the guy across from him, and really started to kind of have his way. And by day three, he clearly punctuated his week. Right, he was incredibly impressive. So this is a player that is ascending. The concern is consistency and then health availability. Right, that's a big one with Caleb Banks. He's going to have to figure out how to keep his body in a position, in shape, so that he can stay on the field and make plays, demonstrate what he's capable of. Definite winner though, combine. Um, I just want to make mention, perhaps not necessarily combine winners per se, but I want to make mention of a few other guys, especially considering the exposure I had to these players in Mobile. I thought Chris McClellan is a guy that probably isn't getting talked about enough. He impressed me. So in Mobile, speaking of edges, Zion Young got a lot of love. Zion got a lot of love for good reason. For good reason. He was very impressive, right? But his teammate Chris McClellan, I thought, had a pretty good showing. And not nothing overwhelming, not great, but I think he helped himself in Mobile. He's at 6'4", 313, 34-inch arms. Not necessarily the most explosive athlete as these testing numbers might show, but I thought I saw a couple primary and secondary pass rush moves. So he's a name of a guy that's kind of on that late day two, early day three kind of edge, kind of teeter tottering for me in terms of my rankings, and a player that you should be aware of. I think he's an ascending player. Nick Barrett falls in that category as well, not unlike Cameron Ball, right? Those pair of interior defensive linemen, I thought, had some pretty solid showings. They were overshadowed by Banks and Lee Hunter. I'm going to mention Lee Hunter here in a second, and Grayson, the aforementioned Grayson out of Oklahoma. But I thought they helped themselves. I thought they had pretty good showings in Mobile. Maybe not necessarily, and take it with a grain of salt, right? These are 300 plus pound men, interior defensive line. You're probably not going to get overwhelming athletic testing numbers from most of those players, but I think they've helped themselves throughout the process. Lee Hunter didn't have a great combine. I don't, as I watch Lee Hunter, and we're talking about a guy who primarily plays, over the center in the A gap, right? I wasn't expecting any wowing coming from Lee Hunter. Again, talking about the entirety of the pre-draft process, including the Senior Bowl, he was outstanding. he was outstanding. I think the only interior defensive lineman on either team that had a better showing than him was Grayson Halton. Like I that, for my purposes, right? And that's why I started this thing off with like why wasn't Grayson getting more attention? But Lee Hunter, he's a big part of Romello and David Bailey's success. Right? You can't mention this Texas Tech defense without talking about Lee Hunter. So while the athletic testing you can see here 21.5 inch vertical broad jump 8 and 4, he's not an explosive athlete. He's not an explosive athlete, but he does a great job of getting his arms extended and controlling offensive linemen, moving them, displacing them, right? And when his pad level is right, he has a tendency to at times perhaps turn his pads. When he is square to the line of scrimmage, he can't be moved in the running game, right? So that's a coaching aspect. But as far as big men who can actually push that pocket and affect the quarterback, very few are as capable as Lee Hunter. So I would not lose my mind with respect to this combine performance. Now, he is a prospect, and for some organizations, some folks that might be a red flag, right? He's going to be, I believe, he's going to turn 25 this year during his rookie season, if I'm not mistaken. But I think for some of those teams that are right on the cusp, that are playoff teams that are just trying to just kind of get over the top, that's where I kind of view Lee Hunter. Late first round, early day two, plug him into that rotation, that interior defensive line rotation, and you can have some success. This is, he said, the guy that caught my eye last year in Mobile was Upton Stout, and even though he's a nine, I thought he played well this year. Absolutely, absolutely. Upton Stout had a very good showing in Mobile, and clearly he earned the trust of that coaching staff and played a lot of football here in year one. Okay, think I think that might do it. I think it might do it for the fellas up front, the interior defensive linemen. Hmm. Just checking some of these other counting numbers just to see if I may have overlooked anything. Again, there's you got Grayson Halton, Cape Hart, sub 1.7 tank yard splits among defensive tackling. Caleb Proctor is an intriguing prospect, older prospect, but intriguing nonetheless. Yeah, you see that Nick Barrett at 171, Grayson Halton at 1.7. Yeah, nothing overwhelming there in the 10-yard split per se, outside of the handful that were sub 1.7. But um, some good players, and like I said, not just solely with respect to the combine, but if you put the pre-draft process to this point in its totality, Senior Bowl, Shrine, plus combine, there's a handful of guys that definitely help themselves. Okay. All right, let's go to the last position group that performed during day one of the 2026 NFL Scouting Combine, and that is the linebacking group. And the entirety of the entire defensive side of the ball is a deep draft. The edge group, um, I don't know that the interior defensive line group is the deepest, but it's a quality. It's pretty decent top to bottom. But the edge group is very deep. Um, the defensive backs, the corners, there's quite a few of those. Safeties as well. Going to get to them because they performed here day two. But the linebacking group is one of the deepest I have ever studied. It is one of the deepest that I've ever studied as far as the NFL draft prognostications. And Sonny Styles clearly leads the pack. I thought had been working on a 3-round mock draft, and I had him going to the Cincinnati Bengals 10th overall most recently. And this particular mock draft didn't get published because, of course, the combine had already started. But I enjoyed going through the process because it kind of helped me level set with a few different prospects. And I had him penciled in for 10th overall to the Bengals, despite the fact that they used some significant draft capital last year, in last year's draft at that position. Demetrius Knight in the second round. I think what they went with Barrett Carter. early day three in the fourth round, right? So that's nothing that's not something that you summarily dismiss, you know. And because the Bengals were so poor defensively a season ago, that they have needs at every level of their defense, right? They don't necessarily have the edge situation figured out. They moved off for Trey Henderson, but didn't trade him. But it just they made some interesting decisions, right, from a personnel standpoint. But they need help at every level of the defense. You know, the one area that you thought, well, you know what, maybe if we add a veteran and we give these young guys another year to develop at the second level, that might be the one area you didn't necessarily prioritize in the draft. But I think if this guy's on the board, you make an exception for him. I'm not sure he gets to 10 anymore. I'm not sure he gets out of the top five, right? 6'5, all of 6'5, 244, runs like the wind with the 4.46 40, jumps out the gym, explosive athlete. I just there's very little to nitpick, right? Even if you're nitpicking, there's very little to actually grab hold on to say, you know what, Sonny Styles needs to work on X. Now that may change. That may change as he gets acclimated to the NFL level, but just the sheer development that we've seen from him over the from one year to the next, right? Put it all together in the 2025 season. The athletic testing clearly marries up with the tape. I don't see a scenario where he gets out of the top five picks, right? And we can talk about guys, you know, being their stock being depressed because the linebacker is in a premium position. I think Sonny Styles is so good in terms of the pass coverage that I think you have to think about this differently, right? This is not just a guy like Arvell Reese, for example, whom is an excellent run defender, right? He can get sideline to sideline, he can stack, he can shed, and then he can give you something in the pass rush department, right? I think what the interesting and unique thing about Arvell Reese is that he might actually be a full-time edge, might be a very good full-time edge. Sonny Styles does all of those things, perhaps not as good a pass rusher from a traditional edge position. That's not how you want to play Sonny Styles. But as far as being able to green dog and understanding when to fire his gun, right? The awareness that he possesses, sideline to sideline speed, he can stack and shed. He's not jumping around blocks, creating gaps. He doesn't miss tackles. He doesn't miss tackles. It's the pass coverage that just puts it over the top, right? He's phenomenal in pass coverage, right? One of the probably the next linebacking prospect in the 2026 class on my board is CJ Allen. I'm a huge CJ Allen fan, big time, right? Made all the calls for Georgia, like literally making all the calls. The actual defensive coordinator isn't necessarily calling the plays. He might have some input, maybe situationally, but generally speaking, CJ Allen is making all the calls. But he does not give you the same type of performance in terms of the pass coverage. And while the pendulum has swung back to teams running downhill, more physicality. As I mentioned, Sonny Styles is perfectly comfortable under those circumstances. He's excellent in coverage. He's phenomenal in coverage, and it remains a passing league. So again, my most recent draft of a mock draft, I had him going to Cincinnati, despite the fact that they committed a couple of draft picks to linebacker a season ago, but he's special, and I'm not sure he gets past the Giants. Right? I'm not sure who of that among that top that 2 to 5 is necessarily going to take him, but I'm not sure he gets past the Giants. I'd be a little surprised at this point. What's going on, Jake? Yeah, yeah. I was probably reluctant to heap this amount of praise on him because he's a Buckeye and a McCain, right? Like privately, I get it. I get how good he is, but I wasn't prepared to heap this kind of praise. It's undeniable. You just can't. You can't hedge with him. You can't. You know the calls that you're starting to see in terms of people saying even before the combine. You know, a number of evaluators saying this might be Jake. You may be among them. This might be the top prospect in the class. I get it. I get it now. I get it. I absolutely get it now. You know what I'm saying? When you put the totality of his film and then you marry it up with this elite testing, we're talking, you know, Brian Urlacher type testing. Like, yeah, Yeah, and HIM for sure, capital HIM, Jake. All right. I think we've waxed enough about Sonny Styles, but that's going to continue right through the draft. Caleb Ellums Orr is a player that I actually identified as a winner. So I want to encourage everyone to visit my Senior Bowl breakdown, right? And it did a little bit differently than perhaps most. Took a little extra time to revisit the practice film. Instead of doing like daily winners, I decided to actually pick two all Senior Bowl teams. So you have an all Senior Bowl first team, all positions on either side of the ball, and an all Senior Bowl second team. And Ellums Orr actually made my second team. I thought I saw some physicality. He competed in those passing situations, those one on ones. A little, I think, slow to diagnose at times. Right, it was a little hesitant to fire his gun in team, but overall, I thought he had a pretty good showing, and he made the second team. I had Kyle Louis, Jacob Rodriguez clearly on the first team, and then Ellums Oren and Xavier Sori out of Arkansas on the second team. But then you see this performance at the combine. You see this performance at the combine, and you see elite athleticism, and it starts to kind of make some sense now, right? What I was seeing, what I was because that was frankly my first exposure to Ellums, or there was a little bit of a vindication associated with me identifying him. I think some thought perhaps the Oregon backer Bodicher was perhaps deserving of that second team. I thought Ellums or edged him a bit, and then you married it up with this kind of athletic testing. I got to go back to the tape and watch some more. I got to go back to the tape and watch some more because he's a player that's ascending, at least in my eyes, as far as this early parts of the evaluation. So good showing from him. Definitely a combine winner. Yeah, I think my top two players are going to be Buckeyes. Yeah, yeah. I maintain. Might be some of my homerism. I don't care. I don't care. I maintain, Jake, that well, who are the two? Because if for my money, the two are among the Buckeyes are Styles, Sonny, the Sonny version, and Caleb Downs. I think the NFL, obviously loves Reese and Styles. Yes, I get it. I got, me, I'm a safety. I got to have Caleb Downs in that. I got to have Caleb Downs in that. And I talked about it, Jake. I'm not sure if you heard it earlier, but I talked about the top edges, right? Arvell Reese, David Bailey, Ruben Bain. I think I maintain Reese is the superior athlete among that group. David Bailey is the best pure pass rusher. Ruben Bain is the best football player among those three. He's not going to wow you with athleticism, but I cannot unsee what I've watched the last 3 seasons. I can't unsee it. It's just too overwhelming, right? And yes, I can probably cherry pick some snaps in which his arm length may have worked against him a bit, but this man's been throwing guys out the club since he was a true freshman, man. I cannot unsee it. So, but I am certainly understanding. I'm certainly understanding of recent styles if you consider them 1, 2 in the draft class, or vice versa. Yeah, yeah, and that's what I mentioned earlier, Jake. I think, and I had this conversation with a Dallas fan, a family member of mine, a Cowboys fan. He always felt like Parsons should play predominantly off ball, right? And then moonlight as a pass rusher, right? Give me 20 high quality pass rush reps a game as opposed to trying to rush 40 45 times and being gassed. You know what I'm saying? Dealing with that offensive tackle all game. You know what I mean? And I thought at the time the Cowboys just desperately needed the pass rush, right? And it appears that even Green Bay has said, "Listen, Micah, go get the quarterback. we'll figure it all out." Now, obviously, Green Bay was in a better situation at the second level with Walker and our boy out of A&M Cooper, but in Dallas they had some significant issues at the second level of their defense, and there was an argument for it, but I thought the pass rush needed the help. I very much believe that Reese should play in that kind of similar vein as far as give me 35 reps off ball, right? Where you can still green dog. I still want you moving forward. I still want you with the delayed blitz and spying and doing that type of thing, moving forward. But then I want to augment that with 15 to 20 really high quality, relatively fresh pass rush reps, right? As opposed to just lining him up at edge all game. I think he's capable of it. I'm not suggesting he isn't capable of it, but some of that sideline to sideline capability that he possesses as a run defender, I don't want to lose that at the second level. And it just kind of depends ultimately where he lands, where he ends up. All right. Anthony Hill Jr. helped himself. He's a player that perhaps, you entering the 2025 season, really considered, widely considered the first linebacker off the board. Right. And then, of course, you have, Sonny Styles and Arville Reese doing their thing, changing things a bit. Texas got off to a bit of a slow start, so that hurt them. But this is really impressive testing numbers. This shows his explosiveness, his athleticism. He has the record with his size. It's all there. It's all there associated with Anthony Hill Jr. I think he's definitely a winner. I think this combine performance helps rehabilitate him, right? Whereas not only were Reese and Sonny Styles flying high based off of their film this year, but then they marry that up with very impressive athletic testing, incredible athletic testing. Anthony Hill Jr. not far off the pace here, not far off the paces. I think that bodes well for him. Yeah, just because he can sift through traffic, eliminate screens, and a flat play through. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Disciplined player. I just the only area that, and again, this is part of the reason why you want to leverage his superpower as a pass rusher, right? Is that I don't think he's great in coverage. I think you can expose Arvell Reese in coverage, right? I think NFL offenses, the NFL caliber tight ends who make a living catching the football, they're gonna give Reese some trouble. Some of those backs who are nice out of the backfield, Dallas on that Dallas route, they're gonna give Reese some trouble, but that's not the way I want to use him. That's just not the way I want to use him. I think Bond developed into a guy who could really cover it, and perhaps Reese can as well. The athleticism certainly is there, but at least initially, I want him moving forward. Okay, what else we got here? We got to get to Jacob Rodriguez, but I'm going to talk about some really good performances. I mean, everybody ran well. I think during the broadcast, Daniel Jeremiah, Rich Eisen were saying that we've had, as far as averages are concerned, the fastest group of edges, linebackers, corners, safeties, so on and so forth. And I think part of that is augmented by the fact that a lot of guys opted out of running the 40. They're going to, continue to refine their process and perhaps run the 40 at their pro days. But a lot of speed, lots of speed. Kyle Louis, speaking of the entirety of the pre-draft process, he was phenomenal in Mobile. Phenomenal. I'm 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 at the point, Jake, where I would just put him out there and let him play the nickel when it's time, when time calls for it. Because Jake, I think you recall the Quinion Mitchell performance, right, a couple of seasons ago in Mobile, where he was just incredibly dominant, and I had not seen. In fact, that was the best quarterback performance I've seen in Mobile, particularly in the one-on-ones I had ever seen since I've been going there. I've been going to Mobile for the Senior Bowl for the last 8 or 9 years, and I thought Kyle Louis had that kind of performance, but at the linebacker position, and you can see with his movement skills, his instincts, coverage. Of course, he has great tape. He now marries it up with very impressive athletic testing here. It all shows. It all shows on tape. So not only did he have a great combine, but he actually started this pre-draft process with a terrific showing in Mobile. He's moving up, despite the fact he's 220. You could consider that undersized. There's a definitive role for him. There's a definitive role for him, and it's not just kind of a sub package role. Maybe that's where it starts in terms of his career, but ultimately, this is going to be an every down player, I think. Yeah. All right. keep it going. I mentioned Jacob Rodriguez. Don't want to bury the lead too much. Jake Galday, I thought was fairly solid throughout the combine as well. But I mentioned I had the two all Senior Bowl teams, and the aforementioned Kyle Louis was on there, as was Jacob Rodriguez, and they talked about this performance being very meaningful for him. Right, the tape clearly is phenomenal at Texas Tech. This guy is he's a magnet to the football. Right, he creates offense because he generates so many turnovers, whether it be ints, the forced fumbles. Like his peanut punch has been perfected. Right, he then goes out to the combine and he checks all the boxes. He checks all the boxes. This is really impressive, right? A 4.57 40-yard dash, a 1.6 10-yard split, almost 39 inches on the vertical jump, broad jump over 10 feet, like cone drill below seven. He checked all of the boxes. He checked all of the boxes. And again, when you marry phenomenal tape with this type of athletic testing, the arrow is pointing up. The arrow is pointing up. I thought it would be a reach for him to perhaps fall out of the second round. I think there's no chance anymore that he falls out of the second round, considering the type of performance he's put together along with this type of athletic testing. Yep. Yep. There's another player that I'm going to talk about, Jake, as far as Big Nickel is concerned. I think he had a fairly decent showing in Mobile and showed some speed at some at good size. I'm going to talk about him among the defensive backs here in just a second. But yeah, Rodriguez definitely has punctuated his pre-draft process. He looks good. Somebody's going to get a really good football player here. In fact, before I move on, I just wanted to share a good friend of mine. I was talking to him. He's a Jaguars fan, and he was asking about with Devin Lloyd moving on in free agency, who might be available. He talked about a few different players, and then he mentioned that his cousin was a former NFL player. Just in passing, happened to be watching a Texas Tech game, and he said, that number 10, I believe, he looks like an NFL player. And he was referring to Jacob Rodriguez just in passing, just in passing. So when you have players like that, and this is that it actually this is a good example of my opinion with respect to Grayson Halton, right? As I'm watching the Senior Bowl practices, I'm actually recording and taking film for content, and you don't always get the best view of all the players. Hence why I go back and I rewatch the practice film to make sure I don't miss anything. But Grayson Halton was just standing out so much among the interior defensive linemen that I didn't necessarily need to do that second check. Rodriguez, for someone who just kind of casually passing by, was jumping off the television screen, and like I said, he's had a wonderful pre-draft process to this point. All right. Yeah, I thought all the linebackers had fairly good showings. I'll have to revisit some of the movement drills to really drill down, but some really quality athletic testing for sure. Okay, let's talk about the cornerbacks. Let's move on to the cornerbacks. And Toriano Pride, former Clemson Tiger, he finished his career with the Missouri Tigers. So he's remained a Tiger at the fastest 40. Dalen Everett's time was very strong, impressive, 4.38 sub 4.4. The tape is a bit inconsistent, but as DJ mentioned, he seemingly plays his best football when the lights are brightest. I thought he struggled a bit in Mobile, particularly in terms of like just just kind of transitioning, getting out of his back pedal smoothly. But the long speed certainly is there. Chris Johnson is another one who I thought didn't have as good a Senior Bowl as I think some would hope. The main issue with him, and DJ mentioned, the top end speed and him checking that box here in Indianapolis at the combine. I wasn't really concerned about his long speed. I think what he's missing is physicality in his coverage. He likes to do the mirror match thing, and I have praised this collection of corners. And Jake, I'm interested to hear what you think on this end. I've praised the corners in this class for being patient and physical, right? Patient at the line of scrimmage, letting the receiver kind of, you know, show their hand as far as their release is concerned, and then actually getting hands on the receivers and disrupting their release, disrupting the timing of the pattern, the quarterback, the drop, so on and so forth. It had been almost a lost art, right? And it was very refreshing as I'm watching film of the corners to see the corners do this. Colton Hood, certainly, he kind of stood out for that. But a lot of the corners are really doing a good job of being patient, remaining square to the line of scrimmage as long as they're possible, and then taking advantage of those first 5 yards and getting physical with receivers. I thought Chris Johnson would have had a much better showing. Now he has great film, but much better showing in Mobile had he actually attempted to challenge, to actually press, bump those receivers. And because he didn't, I think they got over the top. A couple receivers got over the top. Tyron Montgomery got him for a good one too. Um, but as far as click and close and getting out of his breaks and getting his foot in the ground and changing directions, he checked those boxes. And like I said, I wasn't necessarily concerned about the long speed, but that 4.4 even certainly shows he has the long speed. All right, let me keep it going here. Another Senior Bowl participant, Chandler Rivers from Duke. I thought he was a standout at the Senior Bowl, and again, that 4.4 even, 1.55 10 yards for 39 yards. Yeah, yeah. Not the biggest player, clearly. They're going to move him into nickel, but he has the technique and the temperament to play outside the numbers. Again, the size, the lack of length is what's going to force him into nickel, but he's going to be a really good one. Set and forget. You want to talk about Kenny Moore. Here's Kenny Moore all over again, but perhaps a more athletic version of Kenny Moore. So really like what Chandler Rivers did both in Mobile and at the combine. There are a number of really big corners as well. Ephesians Presock and his teammate Takario Davis at Washington. They ran well as well. So I think just considering their sheer size and how fast they are, they definitely help themselves. Charles Demings out of Stephen F. Austin, he had a fairly solid showing in Mobile, with the step up in terms of the competition. And then of course he runs a 4.41, so he's helped himself a lot. I thought Muhammad struggled in Mobile, but his athletic testing certainly will help stabilize his draft stock, for sure. For sure. I think there's already a hive for him as it is. His issue, I think he's just a little stiff. I think he's a little stiff. I think linearly, going forward, or rather click and close. I think he checks that box. I think he has the long speed as evidenced by that 4.42. It's laterally where I think his transition out of his back pedal is where he kind of struggles. So um I think he might be scheme specific, unfortunately. I do like his physicality, though. I really do like his physicality. Overall, Combine helped him. Colton Hood as well. Colton Hood, I think at first blush, you might say, you know what, Colton Hood, he's a good tactician or whatever the case may be. He has the athleticism. Igbenogson is a really interesting one. Igbenogson, to me, he seemingly has all of the physical tools, right? I think he possesses, the desirable size, 6'2". He's got really long arms, almost 33-inch arms. A good athlete, perhaps not an elite athlete, but a very good athlete. He just at the moment of truth, he gets grabby. He commits penalties. He doesn't trust himself. Doesn't trust himself to find the football. He's a player that I want to work with, though. I think for all of the reasons I just mentioned, he's a player that I want to work with because he demonstrates the physicality. There's a competitive nature there. I think he's gotten better throughout his career at Ohio State for sure. So this is a player that I think clearly a day two prospect, but that it's a moment of truth. And I don't know if that's something you can coach. I think that's something that generally is in the player or not. Perhaps he can develop it, but I'd be willing to take a chance on him. Masses out of California was I believe second team all Senior Bowl for me. Has a fairly decent showing. I thought some of the drills maybe not quite as clean, but athletic testing was there. It was a fast group. Julian Neal, Devin Moore. It was a very, very fast group here at the combine. And for the most part, these corners helped themselves. Yep. 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 Rodriguez and Effort the last 2 days. And anyway, really interesting. Interesting. Yep. Yep. I understand. So I assume Quay is walking, right? And then there are needs at corner there for the Packers. So that makes sense. That makes sense. There are quite a few guys that I like more than Everett. I know Everett checks those boxes in terms of size and speed, and I know that means a lot to Green Bay's front office. But there are quite a few corners that may not necessarily have the same measurables as far as size that I think are just better football players at this point, more consistent football players. I think Everett has the talent, but he's just a bit inconsistent for my liking. Okay, talk about the safeties, and the safeties were blazing. They were blazing the 40, Jake. Lorenzo Styles Jr., the brother of Sonny Styles, not to be outdone in the 40. Of course, there's a 50-pound difference between the two. He runs a 4.27, and that could very well be the fastest 40 for anyone, any position at the combine when it's all said and done. But blazing 40, he looked fairly smooth in the agility drills. He was a player that just doesn't play 4.27 fast. You know, the track speed seemingly is there, but he just didn't play that fast. You know what I'm saying? He decided he wasn't going to be outdone, though. He decided he wasn't going to be outdone. And when you test like this, right? When you log a 4.27 and you have decent size, but certainly that effectively 39-inch vertical, that's going to get you looks. That's going to get you looks when those teams are picking day three, and they're not necessarily looking for the best football player, but they're trying to perhaps catch lightning in bottle with a superior athlete. That's when you'll see the Lorenzo Styles type start to come off the board. And I need you to show me the 4.27 on special teams, right? You want to make a team, show me that 4.27 on special teams, make a difference. You know what I mean? But he definitely helped himself. He's now put himself in the minds of folks, right? He's not just an afterthought at this point. Traydon Stukes is a player that I've gotten more familiar with over the last couple of weeks. Blazing 40 at 4.33. Robert Spears Jennings is not a player I'm familiar with. But you know, with this kind of performance, this is a pretty good performance. Athletic testing wise at 6.2205, I got to go back to the tape. Definitely got to go back to the tape. Dylan Thineman, he may have locked in the first round pick. What say you, Jake? Is he a first round pick? Um, he tested like one for sure. You know, you see what he does on the field. The film looks phenomenal. When you marry that up with this kind of athletic performance, 41-inch vertical, explosive athlete, headsy football player. The range is there. He tackles pretty well. Um, there's a lot to like here. There's a lot to like here. I know Emmanuel Neal Warren was being kind of pushed, at least by some, ahead of Cinnamon. I'm not convinced just yet. I'm not convinced just yet. In that mock draft that I had been working on, I had them both going in the top 40. They were day two players, but I think certainly in the case of Cinnamon, he may end up in the first round. Here's the guy I wanted to talk about, Jake. Here's the guy I want to talk about. I want to talk about Jalen Kilgore. You mentioned, Kyle Louis being able to play the big safety as a linebacker, kind of safety hybrid. 6 foot, 220. Kilgore is 6'1", 210. That's a fairly big defensive back. It's a fairly big defensive back. He made my first team, all Senior Bowl team. The one-on-ones was a mixed bag, but what stood out to me, and this is just the nature of the beast when it comes to the one-on-ones. Again, outside of a Quinion Mitchell type performance, the nature of the beast is that you're going to lose most of those reps. Typically, you're going to lose most of those reps. But it's How did you perform within it, right? What'd you do on the subsequent rep, right? Did you make some adjustments? Kilgore in 7-on-7 and team was excellent. Excellent. He played predominantly nickel. That's what he did at South Carolina. And even in the one-on-ones, he was always in phase. The receivers just made good plays. It wasn't like he was just getting beat and the receivers were creating tons of separation. He was typically in phase. The receiver just made a good grab. But 7-on-7, 11-on-11, he started to shine. So really strong Senior Bowl showing. And then excellent athletic testing on top of that. Not a lot of people talking about Jalen Kilgore, considering you really had some wow me type performances in Indy at the combine, but I am impressed with his pre-draft process as well. Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. It was a calculated move going to Oregon. I think certainly going to Oregon put him in the eyes of the mainstream, right? Um, and the fact that he had success, doing a myriad of things, being asked a myriad of things by two different programs, yeah, it probably substantiates it. I would have to agree with you, Jake. Like I said, he's probably going to end up in those first 32 selections. Another couple of safeties that I thought had strong showings in Mobile, and for my money, Bud Clark was the best defensive back in Mobile. Were VJ Payne as well. I thought he had a fairly good showing in Mobile. I'm not sure he made the second team, but he was an honorable mention. Big player, 6'3", 206, almost 34-inch arms, ran a 4.4 flat. Yeah, yeah. VJ Payne has had a really strong pre-draft process, definite combine winner. I encourage folks to go back and check him out in terms of his Senior Bowl performance. I have some more work to do in terms of his tape at Kansas State, but he's definitely on my radar. This actually happened during Senior Bowl week, and like I said, this just substantiates it with this type of testing. Bud Clark is my guy, man. I think when you talk about my guys, I don't know that I have a lot of them in this particular draft, albeit there's a lot of good football players. But Bud Clark is my guy, right? He's going to be an older prospect. I think he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie. I don't care. I don't care, right? And what impressed me the most about Bud Clark in Mobile was how well he played in the slot, right? Split safety looks, single high. I had already seen all of that at TCU. I had already seen all of that. 15 INTs over the course of 4 seasons. Only player in the FBS with at least 3 INTs over the last 4 years. But Bud Clark had already answered those questions based on the film, right? Um, the two questions that I did have was so let me reiterate what he does in the deep parts of the field, half field split, single high, check those boxes already just off the strength of the tape. The questions I had was, can he fill, right, from depth in terms of run support? I thought he did a pretty good job of that in Mobile. I thought he did a pretty good job of that. His angles, the speed at which he was able to close the distance. I thought he did a good job there. But what really impressed me about Bud Clark was how he performed in man to man coverage, right? Not only in the one on ones where I thought he did a really good job, but in team as well. You know what I mean? There's a lot of free access to those slot receivers, and he held up very well. So I am very impressed by Bud Clark. I'm sure there are going to be NFL organizations that kind of depress his value because of his advanced age. He's been in college for 6 years, seen it all. Probably already kind of reached his apex, but that apex is really good. This is really good. To me, he's a starter in short order. He's ready to go. And then like I said, you marry up all that quality film, right? And few players have as much good film as Bud Clark, and then you get really strong athletic testing. Yeah, he's definitely a winner. That's it right there, Jake. He's a dog. Like you could see the competitiveness oozing out of him, right? And now this testing really cemented. You could start to see it because of what he was doing in man-to-man coverage at Mobile, but it cements how good of an athlete he actually is. So not only does he possess the mentality and the corresponding instincts to make plays on the football, but he can get there in a hurry. He can get there in a hurry. It's all pointing in the right direction for Bud Clark. The only thing working against him is his age, and I'm ready to dismiss it. I'm prepared to dismiss it. Amari Ramsey had a good showing as far as that 4.47 was concerned. I thought Michael Taff had a lot to prove coming into the combine. I thought he struggled in Mobile, right? That's a good time for Michael Taff, right? He's a smaller guy as far as his weight is concerned. You turn on the film and he's typically exactly where he's supposed to be. Good player, but I thought when on that Senior Bowl stage, I thought he struggled. So coming into the combine, to me, he needed to kind of help himself. I'm not sure that he was great. I'll have to double check. I don't want to misspeak here in terms of the drills, the field drills, but he did a good solid 40 that 4.5. Then you have Emmanuel McNeil Warren. I'm perfectly fine with the 4.52. Same with AJ Halsey. Halsey and McNeil Warren, I thought looked good in the drills. Bishop Fitzgerald has a pretty significant hive, right? I was really interested to see how he would test. That's not bad. That's not bad. I thought, if I'm remembering correctly, I thought he struggled a little bit in the drills, just kind of transitioning, right, getting in and out of breaks. I'll try to make sure that I'm not misspeaking there. But I thought that there may have been some challenges, some slipping and sliding there. But absolutely, Jake. I couldn't agree more. When you talk about the Lee Hunters of the world, the Bud Clarks of the world, some of these older prospects, maybe for some of these rebuilding teams, teams that are further away from competing, you go in a different direction. But those teams that are right on the cusp, I'm definitely in favor of taking those guys. Like I think again, I make reference to the mock draft that never was. I had Lee Hunter going to the Rams late in the first with their second of two first round picks because the Rams are in a situation where they have a lot of good football players entering the last year of their contracts, right? That includes Kobe Turner, that's Byron Young. Go to the offensive side of the ball. The Rams faithful, they've been very clear about, well, we don't need a tackle. Rob Henderson didn't play much last year. Will McClendon was great for us. Well, he's going into the last year of his deal. So you might actually need a tackle. Steve Avila. Puka is going to get paid, I don't know, $50 million a year. You're going to have to make some decisions. So a team that just came up short of making it to the Super Bowl, yeah, I think especially when you still have issues stopping the run, I could work a Lee Hunter in, assuming I solve the cornerback position. I could work him in. Same thing with Bud Clark, right? The team that comes to mind that is in fairly significant need of a safety, the Chicago Bears. Jake, you might not like to hear that considering your Packers, but Chicago Bears is a team that I think set that age aside, right? You're right there now. You know what I'm saying? Like your roster is set up to win now. Go ahead and nab one of those guys. They could use Lee Hunter as well. They got an issue at D tackle. Okay, that's going to do it for the defensive backs. I'm going to take a quick look at a couple pieces from Chad Reuter, who writes for NFL.com. See if there's any players that I may have overlooked and give my thoughts there. But I do want to take a quick peek at the tight ends and just talk about two in particular. I want to talk about two tight ends in particular before we move on. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I hate to give it all away because I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. It's a 3 round mock draft that I'm working on. Um I had I'll just tease it with this. I had the Bears trading out of the first round. Despite their needs, despite the players on the board, I had them trading out of the first round and trading for a veteran. All right. And I'll let you take a guess who that veteran was. I did solve for D tackle and safety as well as edge. All right. So the tight ends, Kenyon Sadiq, man. I saw folks talking about how Sadiq, they may be out on Sadiq because of his weight. And I got news for you. There aren't a whole lot of 6'6", 260-pound tight ends in this class, right? But I guarantee you, just about all of them are going to be drafted because not only are they quality athletes, again, this group was considered as far as 40-yard averages, the fastest ever. Um, Not only are they good athletes, but it's just the nature of the position. The, it's the nature of the position because the utility of all the things that tight ends are asked to do. Now there are different types of tight ends. Not everybody is an inline tight end is going to put their hand in the ground and be an extension of your offensive line. But a guy like Kenyon Sadiq, who's demonstrated the ability that the willingness and the capability to move people, right, with this type of elite athleticism, this is this is faster than Vernon Davis. That 4.39 is just a tick faster than Vernon Davis. Now, mind you, Vernon Davis was 6'2", 252 pounds. So he had about 10 pounds on Sadiq. But who's to say that Sadiq can't put on another 5 to 7 pounds, right? I know. This whole notion that he's not going to go in the first round because he's not 6'5", 260. Spare me. It's a different league. It's a different league. He's going to be a first round pick. As far as I'm concerned, he should be a first round pick. These are phenomenal numbers. 43.5-inch vertical. I think that's was tied for the highest until Eli Stowers just blew it out of the water. 11-1 broad jump. He's a clearly explosive athlete. I think, sometimes you get these guys at the tight end position or any position for that matter that is very fast linearly. I think Sadiq has enough wiggle. I wouldn't say that's his calling card. I think he's definitely more of a linear athlete, but I think he has enough wiggle to really substantiate, being able to get in and out of breaks. That's something I would want to continue to refine with him, but I don't see how this gets out of the first round. Big time winner, and as well as the aforementioned Stowers. Good time here from RJ Maryland as well. I like Max Clare. He did not run the 40, but I like Max Clare. If you're looking for more of a traditional tight end, uh, Eli Stowers a little bit lighter, just slightly lighter. Definitely not the inline blocker that Sadiq is, but that 4.51 with the 1.59 10-yard split plus, and of course he was a high jumper in his previous life. He was a high jumper. He sets the combine record for vertical jump, the broad jump, like just explosive athlete. And the way he catches the football, right? Like sign me up. Sign me up. I don't know that even with all this impressive athletic testing and really strong film in terms of catching the football, I don't know that he works his way into the first round. Maybe. I don't see it that way. It won't happen in my mock draft, but I think he's going to be the second tight end off the board after Sadiq. Really strong showing from Eli Stowers. Okay. Let's see here if I got we could transition here. This is the day one. Okay, so let's take a look at Chad Reuter's piece in terms of his stock up, stock down from day one. See what we agree with, what we may not necessarily agree with. We talked about Demonte Capehart, definitely back in the forefront of our minds with the strong combine showing. I mentioned Elams Orr. Again, he's a player that kind of jumped out at me during the Senior Bowl, and it was good to see him follow that up with a strong Senior Bowl showing. What's your concern about Stowers, Jake? What's your concern about him? Like I get the fact that he's not going to be a guy that's going to give you much of anything in line, but um, do you have a plan for him? Is my question at the end of the day, right? And do you feel like he's someone that could be serviceable in that regard? Grayson Halton, again, I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't loud enough about Grayson Halton, but again, I mentioned I thought coming out of the Senior Bowl, no one was talking about him. I think perhaps Ian Cummings from PFN had mentioned moving him up the board, which I absolutely agreed with after his Senior Bowl showing. But he certainly punctuated things here at the combine. Talked about Malachi Lawrence ad nauseum. He's a player that I was late to the party on, but he I don't know that anybody's helped himself more than Malachi Lawrence. Dalton Kincaid flashbacks where he's yeah, yeah, there may be some of that. And for that reason, he's not a day one pick. And for that reason, he's not a day one pick. But I think if you have the corresponding personnel on your roster and you have a definitive plan for him, he's a guy that I would want to add. He's a guy that I want to add. I understand your point though. You may have to take him sooner than you'd like, right? You acknowledge his ability in the passing game, but you probably would have to take him sooner than you might like. I get it. Again, Malachi Lawrence. Um, can't say enough about his performance of the combine, and certainly there's that hive. That hive is only going to grow. Sonny Styles, of course. Caden McDonald. Yeah, that's I'm not. I wouldn't say stock down. I mean, if you understand what Caden McDonald does, um, his testing performance really shouldn't necessarily bug you. I think the whole idea of moving Caden McDonald into the first round, I think, is a bit much. I think that is a bit much. There may be one or two teams late in the first round that can afford going with a two down run stopper. But I think the expectation that we've kind of placed on him because he had such a great year and he cleared the runaway for Reese and Sonny Styles. I think that's a bit much. And again, his game is not predicated on athleticism and change of direction and twitch and stuff. He's obviously tying up those interior offensive linemen and allowing the second level guys to flow and make plays. So the whole stock down moniker for Cade McDonald, I may not necessarily agree with it. I certainly certainly didn't help himself. You could definitely say that, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far as stock down. LT Overton is a good one. I watching him in Mobile, you could see that there's a lack of burst. There's definitely a lack of burst that shows up in his athletic testing. Um, what do you do with him, right? He's a 4-3 in my mind. He's a 4-3 edge setter. You know what I'm saying? That plays with a lot of physicality, plays with a lot of physicality. But I don't know that he's going to give you much in terms of pass rush. And if you decide to say, you know what, make him a legitimate down lineman in the odd man front, you would have to add some mass to his frame. So he's a he's an interesting one. He's an interesting one. He's kind of teetering a bit. R. Mason Thomas, again, I thought we would see a bit more explosiveness from him. And I think that's what Chad Ruder is kind of referring to. When you kind of juxtapose him as Ruder is to David Bailey and Lawrence's 40-yard times and their 10-yard splits and so on and so forth, you might throw a little cold water on him. A Gabe Akis may have eclipsed Mason Thomas. Makai Lawrence may have eclipsed Mason Thomas in the eyes of some, but I don't think he hurt himself per se. I just don't know that he helped himself. Okay. That was Chad Ruder from day one. Let's see about day two. Ooh, here we go. Yeah, yeah. And for that reason, and that's why I would consider both those guys late day one for that reason. For that reason, for sure. I think you just have to understand what McDonald is, right? And as I mentioned, with the pendulum swinging back to more gap principles from offenses and balanced offense as the defense is adjusted to the proliferation of 11 personnel and more 12 personnel, you're going to need guys who can hold up. You're going to need guys who can hold up and two gap and do the dirty work, right? And as you mentioned, Jay, considering how young McDonald is, it's a 1 year starter. The expectation is for him to get better. So again, I definitely wouldn't say stock down. All right. So on day two, Chad Ruder has Dalen Everett with his stock up, and for good reason, right? He measured in with really good size, ran a really fast 40, showed explosiveness with a 37.5-inch vertical. So I would agree with that. I just wish he was a bit more consistent. Gillenborg was at the Senior Bowl. I thought all the tight ends, and this is why I maintain that all the tight ends will be drafted at some point. He had a flash or two in Mobile and helped himself. He tested fairly well here at the combine. Chris Johnson, I'd agree. I'd agree. If you were concerned about his long speed, I'd agree that he was a combine winner. Toriano Pride clearly with the 4.32 helps. I just worry about his ball, his ability to track the football. Right. I think he has a tendency to get out of phase despite all of that speed. So it's a question of does he actually play that fast? Right. Sadiq, no doubt about that. Lorenzo Styles Jr. We talked about him. Dylan Thineman as well. Igmanosin, I think improved his coverage of seeing how the Buckeyes stifle offenses. Definitely has the size that teams want. 34-inch vertical, not impressive. Not the type of 10-yard split you'd want from, an upper echelon corner, I suppose. See if he'll struggle to find a just the ball one challenge. I think everything that's written here is clearly reflected in his tape, right? I think he has the desired size and competitive temperament that you want. I think he is speedy enough. 4.45 is not slow by any stretch of the imagination. I think he has enough speed. I do think he's a bit tight in the hips at times. But it to me, it just comes down to finding the football. I think that's where he struggles, and he's going to be penalized. So again, from my vantage point, maybe not stock down, but didn't help himself either. Max Clare didn't run the 40, didn't run the 40. So maybe that's a concern there. And maybe McNeil Warren made the list as stock down. Uh, I guess when you juxtapose it against Finneman, perhaps from that perspective, right? There are a number of and prognosticators, YouTube prognosticators like myself, as well as national scouts that had McNeil Warren, comfortably in front of Dylan Finneman, and maybe this performance has kind of brought him back to the mean a bit, but I don't think he did anything that his performance today was necessarily poor that would warrant a stock down from that perspective. So I think just some other guys were better, right? And Chad Ruda mentioned it. My guy Kilgore, Genesis Smith, and Finneman displaying elite athleticism. Yeah, yeah. I'm with you, Jake. Like you can't unsee the things you see on tape. but but relative to Finneman in particular, right? Relative to who's safety two after Caleb Downs, right? Maybe that's why you kind of you drop him down a little bit. But otherwise, I'm with you. I'm not moving him down. I wouldn't consider it a stock down. So interesting thoughts. They're going to be varying thoughts on all of it, and it's been entertaining through the first couple of days. I'll be honest. I have not paid as close attention real time with the combine. I kind of go back afterwards and check the numbers and kind of see how things um, marry up to the film. But having watched these players this year has really kind of clarified things for me in certain instances. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. I think the disparity between the two and how high McNeil Warren was ranked by DJ. I think he was 15th in his top 50. Is why he may be considered a stock down, but nonetheless, really good football player. All right, I think that's gonna do it, man. It was good. It was good to get back into the saddle here for a live. I'll probably chop this up and put this on the main channel, Couch Potato General Manager, as far as combine winners and losers. But do me a favor. If you're not already subscribed to our second half draft show channel, this is the channel where we do our live streams. Be sure to do so. Also, hit the like button. Hit the like button. We're trying to grow this platform. I know I've been MIA as of late, but certainly things heating up. We're in the midst of combine. NFL draft season is well underway. So we'll finish this draft season strong. All right. Everyone, you guys have a great weekend. Good catching up with you, Jake. I'm gonna reach out to you, Jake. We should probably do a mock draft here in the coming weeks. So I'll reach out to you. Have a good one. Until next time.